Criminal investigation is starting into both Bob Vylan and Kneecap's performances at Glastonbury. It's over comments they appeared to make on stage about Israel and the war in Gaza. The former Attorney General, Sir Michael Ellis, has told LBC the Director General of the BBC should resign because the corporation didn't cut the live feed.
It's his responsibility at the very top of the organisation. There should literally have been someone with a finger hovering over that button because it was entirely predictable that this could happen. So I think heads should roll at the BBC.
A 92-year-old man has been found guilty of the rape and murder of a grandmother nearly 6 decades ago. Detectives are now investigating whether Ryland Headley may be responsible for other unsolved crimes. The government has confirmed disabled people already receiving personal independence payments won't lose them in changes to the welfare system. More than 100 Labour MPs threatened to rebel against the plans if they weren't watered down. 6 British players are through to the second round of the singles at Wimbledon. Emma Raducanu, Cameron Norrie and wildcard Oliver Tarvet are among those who won their matches today. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 37 points at 87.60. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.17. LBC weather, a warm night ahead for southern regions with temperatures staying in the low 20s. Fresher in the north with lows of 11. Another hot and muggy day in the south tomorrow. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and very good evening and welcome to Monday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. It's 2 minutes past 8. Joining me on the panel today, to my left, Baroness Stowell, Conservative peer, former leader of the party in the House of Lords and former head of corporate affairs for the BBC, which might be relevant if anyone wants to ask about what's leading our news bulletins. Charlotte Nichols is next to her, Labour MP for Warrington North. To my right, Rachel Shabi, journalist, writer and broadcaster, who's the author of the book Off-White, The Truth About Anti-Semitism, which must be out in paperback by now, isn't it?
Nearly.
Not quite. And James Heale, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator. They're here to take your calls on anything you like to talk about. 0345 6060 973. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player and you can see my casual holiday attire, which I've rather regretted wearing today for reasons which we might or might not go into later. So it's Cross Question for the next hour here on LBC.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's start off with a WhatsApp question from James in Hitchin. What disturbs the panel more about the weekend in Glastonbury? The controversial performance itself, I won't mention the performers' names, well done, or the enthusiasm from the crowd in joining in the chants? Great question. Charlotte Nichols.
I think it's what came from the stage. I was talking with some friends earlier and they were saying that, given the level of inebriation that you would expect to see at Glastonbury, that you could see how people would get swept up into chanting near enough anything. But it's something they were being directed to chant from the stage, and I think that's the fundamental issue here.
And how did that make you feel when you watched that?
I mean, I didn't watch it until after the fact. It was something that I knew there was going to be a statement on from the Culture Secretary today, so I wanted to see what was being discussed. I think it was troubling. I mean, death to anyone is incitement, and I think there has been an interesting conversation both about the freedom of speech and right of artistic expression, but also what responsibilities the BBC has as a nationally funded broadcaster and what they're putting out to the public. I think people assume there's a delay that there isn't, but perhaps that's something that should be looked at in future.
You're Jewish yourself. A lot of my Jewish friends are just feeling utterly bereft at the moment. And this is sort of almost the last straw for some people, thinking, well, how can we live in a country that doesn't, where some people, a lot of people, don't seem to think that this is a big issue?
I think it is troubling, and I know that there are a lot of Jewish friends that I've got who take all sorts of political opinions about the situation that's happening in Israel and Gaza at the moment, but that there is an undercurrent, certainly on social media in particular, that is fundamentally hostile to Jewish people, again, regardless of the position they take on these things. I think I'm more troubled by some of the other things that were reported from Glastonbury, things which were more kind of explicitly anti-Semitic, and the way that didn't seem to be being challenged by other festival goers. Reports of Jewish people having to set up, or organisers indeed, Jewish people feeling like they had to set up sort of spaces for themselves within that festival, which very much goes against the ethos of an event like that, in my view.
Rachel Shabi, you've written a book about anti-Semitism, and it's almost a sort of counterintuitive book in some ways. I hope you don't mind me describing it like that, but you are Jewish yourself as well. Now, what was your reaction to what happened on Saturday?
Well, we're being asked what disturbs us the most, and truthfully what disturbs me the most is the media bandwidth given to this subject. Just this weekend, we've had some of the deadliest bombardments on Gaza by Israel, carpet bombing Gaza. Schools where people are sheltering were bombed. A cafe where people were seeking shelter from the heat was bombed. On Friday, Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, had a report where Israeli soldiers said, actually, yes, we are shooting to kill civilians who are starving and looking for aid and going to aid centres in Gaza, killing field. There's no enemy, no threat, we're just killing them. That's an Israeli soldier saying that. In a weekend where we've had these two things, on top of a 20-month-long war described as genocide by genocide experts, it is absolutely shameful and a disgrace that the media is focusing on this and not having the headlines running day after day on the atrocities that are being committed in Gaza and the dystopian nightmare that Palestinians in Gaza are experiencing every day now for the past 20 months.
And I completely understand why you say that, why you put it that way, and you clearly feel very strongly about this, and that's absolutely fine. But I mean, to return to the question here, did you as a Jew yourself, did you not find it worrying, to say the least, that both the person on the stage was chanting basically an incitement to murder, and indeed the audience were chanting it as well? I mean, I found that profoundly disturbing.
Well, what I think is that, you know, the government and the media have only themselves to blame for this pressure cooker situation where there is such a blatant hypocrisy. You know, we have Israelis and Israeli soldiers and Israeli performers routinely shouting death to Arabs, routinely. They're not saying death to Hamas. They're not saying death to the Al-Qassam brigades. They're saying death to Arabs. They mean Palestinians as people.
And I would condemn that equally as strongly as I would condemn...
We have a pressure cooker situation here where for 20 solid months, day after day after day, we have been watching the most grotesque things it is possible to watch human beings experience in Gaza. The slaughter, the massacre, the war crimes, the largest cohort of child amputees created in Gaza. And people are watching governments and media, including our government, obfuscate, support, give financial and military support and diplomatic cover to Israel while it does this. Of course, people are losing their minds over it. And of course, I respect any artist who uses their platform to call attention to this grotesque atrocity that's happening in real time every day.
So you basically support what he said?
I don't say death to anybody. Right? That's not what I would say. I can understand the level of rage and frustration and despair and powerlessness that people feel that would lead them to use their platforms to draw attention to what's going on in Gaza.
I think the question has to be asked, in that given what's happening in Ukraine as well, where there are huge numbers of innocent people being killed by the Russian army, lots of amputees, terrible scenes from there as well of destruction. Now, not on the in some ways not on the scale of Gaza, because you can see that virtually every building in Gaza seems to have been destroyed. But the number of people in Ukraine who've been killed and maimed, I think, is higher. nobody's shouting death to the Russian army.
No, actually, they were. They were shouting that early on, and Twitter allowed it and Facebook allowed it. But listen, let's not compare. I don't think it's very productive. I do think there is a very clear distinction here, because Israel is an ally of Britain. It is being supported. It is being financially assisted and given diplomatic cover. We are all clear, and so is the UK government, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is abhorrent. And there is a hypocrisy here. There is a double standard here that is driving people mad, and I think rightly, because all we want is a shared humanity, is a universalism that says no child, no school, no civilian, no hospital, anywhere should be bombed. And just the basic consistency of that is not happening.
Okay. James Heale.
I think you touched on it there, Iain, when you said more about celebrating Ukraine than it was about doing down and wishing the death of Russians. And I think that if he'd stood up there and said free Palestine, that would have fit within the mainstream of opinion at Glastonbury. But having death to the IDF, and doing it in such a way, I think, first of all, to answer the question from the listener, it clearly was the artist who was leading in that. But my understanding is that there was a sort of soliloquy before that. So it's a curious question about when the BBC should pull the plug on these things. They had warning signs before that. I think the thing about the UK's involvement in all this is, of course, that it is the BBC broadcasting it, licence fees, putting that out. And in terms of Glastonbury, obviously, occupies something hugely important to the national psyche, the UK's biggest national concert. And therefore, I think that that's why people felt so particularly aghast by that and some of the words that have been put out. And that seems very much in the face of what the organisers professed that Glastonbury is supposed to be about.
Okay, Tina?
Yes, and I think as much as Rachel has expressed her concern about media coverage of events in Gaza, I do think it's important to separate these two things. And as James has just said, I mean, this is a music festival. And a music festival which has become a very celebrated annual event in this country and is broadcast by the national broadcaster. And we have to also keep in mind that the atrocity of 7th of October in 2023 started with terrorists attacking young people at a music festival. And that too contributes to a sense of horror in the way in which people have responded to both what the performers said on stage, the disturbing reaction of the crowds, and that doesn't, I think, in any way detract from the kind of concerns that some people do understandably have about what they see about and hear about in terms of innocent civilians in Gaza. But I think that, for the BBC to have not put in place proper mechanisms which allowed them to either have it broadcasting on a delay so that they could pull a plug even before anything went live, and then to not respond immediately when, as has already been said, before we even got to the chanting, there was some horrific soliloquy which was anti-Semitic. I mean, it no wonder the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport is asking questions and, is demanding answers, because it's hard to understand how this happened.
You've held a senior position at the BBC. I mean, from what you remember of that time, what's going on in the BBC tonight? Because there are senior people calling for the Director General to resign. Many others think that's completely over the top. And will it be as normal that deputy heads will roll?
Well, I'm not sure I would call for the Director General's head to roll, but I think this is, somebody's going to have to answer for this. And I don't know who will be the appropriate executive, but somebody has got to take responsibility, because this has been a massive editorial breakdown, the consequences of which are very serious. And it can't be something which can be in any way diminished as not serious and not important. And I think I've also been concerned to hear that it took them several hours to even sort of ensure that it wasn't sort of put out on iPlayer. Do you know what I mean?
Which is odd when the Director General was actually present at Glastonbury himself.
Well, I mean, this is all part of the thing. I mean, to me, music has always been political. Performers have always used their art in order to make political statements. That's not new. But I think we live in a world now where increasingly music artists are encouraged, I know this particular band doesn't even have a record label, I don't think, but I know they're encouraged by the record labels.
They don't have an agent anymore either.
To be political, because that generates support and more audiences. So it's the music industry is becoming increasingly activist in that way, because it's a way of sort of getting followers and supporters. Knowing that, you would expect the BBC to be even more on it now in this kind of day and age. And then on top of that, knowing that they've got this other band who, have been subject to, all sorts of different investigations. It really is. I genuinely find it hard to understand.
OK, we've got another question on this, a sort of more general question about free speech coming up in just a couple of moments' time. 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
We have with us Charlotte Nichols, Labour MP for Warrington North, Conservative peer Bettina Stowell, Rachel Shabi, journalist and writer, and James Heale, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator. Kevin is in Basingstoke. Kevin, hi, what would you like to ask?
Should we have absolute free speech or stick with what we've got?
Absolute free speech where anything goes, or stick with what we've got? Rachel?
Well, no, I don't think we should have absolute free speech. I think there are definite red lines regarding hate speech and incitement against racialised minorities. There are obviously...
Incitement to murder?
There are obviously... Well, that wasn't targeting a racialised minority. That was targeting a state army, and those are very different things. And I think conflating them
incitement to murder is incitement to murder.
Does a disservice to people who do want to fight racism against all racialised minorities. So yes, I do think there should be limits, and I think one of the problems with the way we have the way we implement free speech currently is that it's done selectively. Some people are allowed to say things and others aren't, and we've seen that play out so clearly over the last 20 months when, and I'm someone who, as you know, have written a book about anti-Semitism and how we can tackle it. And what we've seen over the last 20 months is everyone from, the UN to pop stars to, Israelis and Jews calling for the slaughter to stop in Palestine being denounced as anti-Semitic. The Haaretz, when they publish a report about Israeli soldiers. They're accused of perpetrating blood libels. So
but it's
impossible.
not one-way traffic, is it? Because you've got that case after the Southport riots, Lisa Connolly, who made some disgusting comments on Facebook. Should she have been sent to jail for 31 months? I think a lot of people on the right and left, actually, I think have a problem with that.
And I think one of the biggest problems we have at the moment is the lack of consistency.
Isn't that inevitable, though? Because in terms of free speech, all four of us here would have different red lines, wouldn't we? How you codify that, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I've looked at anti-Semitism, so I can tell you about that. And what I can tell you is when Lisa Nandy, as she did today, stands up and calls what happened in Glastonbury anti-Semitism, when it's people chanting, we may agree with it or not agree with it, but they're talking about an army of a state. And that is
all happen to be Jewish.
And that is not anti-Semitism, right? And for me, obviously that's horrendous in terms of free speech and being able to speak about the atrocities carried out in Palestine. But another very dangerous byproduct of that is that if you constantly say things like that are anti-Semitic, people are going to stop taking you seriously over anti-Semitism at a time when it is spiralling globally.
Tina.
Well, I certainly don't agree that we should have absolute free speech, because I think there always has to be limits. But I think that those limits should be as expansive as we can possibly make them. I mean, I would much rather live in a world where we are free to say what we think and cause offence, and know that we can cause offence, and that's, we don't want to do that, but, somebody can't somehow, we can't be sort of imprisoned for doing it. Although, as you've said, I mean, sadly, we are now seeing real examples of people being pursued by the police and, in some cases, charged and convicted and given lengthy prison sentences for saying things which are clearly hugely unacceptable, horrible, nasty, all these sort of things. I mean, I can't think of the best words to describe them, but, whether that should lead to imprisonment is for me where I get very concerned about whether the lines are now sort of coming, are coming in inwards rather than being.
But we're also being censored in terms of matters of taste and decency now, aren't we? Where you see certain television programmes which 20 years ago, they were made, like Little Britain, for example, which I still think is one of the funniest programmes ever made on television, and yet quite a high percentage of the sketches in that you could not show on television nowadays because people would be offended by it in some way, and that's an attack on free speech as well, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I guess, interesting. I never liked Little Britain. I used to find it sort of really quite. I genuinely found it distasteful. I used to sort of say, I don't understand why anybody laughs at this. So,
Ian.
Sorry.
But I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable for a broadcaster to decide that the kind of tastes have moved on. Do you know what I mean? But I wouldn't want a recording, as in the original production of something, to be altered or tampered with, so that if somebody wants to go back and watch it, on a iPlayer or anything like that, or so that I object to. But I think there are tastes do change. I think that's
okay. James.
What happens.
There's always been constraints on free speech. Some of them exist to this day. So obviously the ones being contempt of court, libel, etc. We once had things like theatre censorship and blasphemy. So we never had complete, absolute free speech in a modern society. Equally, I do think there's a point here about the unequal application of the law. I suppose my criticism slightly is when it comes to things like Lucy Connolly is how which the law can be so reactive at times and so responsive and can throw the book at people, 31 months. I think of, in a different application, when the Met investigated Boris Johnson and Partygate in January 2022, and suddenly the whole law was brought down on that. And so what people find frustrating, I think, is unequal application, whereby suddenly the Met can be or the police force can be so responsive to certain issues, but not others. And I suppose that is the issue when it comes to free speech is, how is it, for instance, they can be so quick in some issues and yet not, for instance, when it comes to kneecap not being prosecuted over there, kill your local MP.
25 minutes and we hadn't mentioned
I'm sorry,
the band's
I had to mention it.
Right, swear
But
box,
that was
Corey.
censorship.
Sorry. So now I'll be cut off for the rest of the programme.
Exactly.
Yeah, sorry.
Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, I have freer speech than most, because as a member of Parliament, when I'm in the chamber, I have parliamentary privilege, and there's a level of protection that I have there, which allows me to
Have you
raise.
ever exercised that?
I haven't, although I know people that have, because I think free speech is also about responsibility. So as much as I could go in the chamber and, denounce and libel any of you without you being able to do much about it, I also think that would be a pretty irresponsible thing to do. We have those things for a reason. And as James said, I don't think any of us want to live in a society where you have absolute freedom of speech. I think we all want protection from harassment, from stalking, from libel, from, contempt of court. But as James said, it's about that being an equal application. It's about us all understanding what those responsibilities are to each other, and the law being fairly applied when it comes to that. I think there's a social contract around freedom of speech. And I do think that we've maybe moved away from it with this whole sort of argument about cancel culture in recent years. But people only ever seem to be concerned when it's cancelling people who they agree with versus people they disagree with. And I think we need to get back to kind of first principles on some of this stuff.
Right, let's move on to another subject, very important one. Mike in Salisbury. Has the government done enough to convince you its welfare reforms should be passed tomorrow? Now, the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, has confirmed today, under the government's revised plans for these reforms, those people already getting the personal independent payment or the health part of universal credit will continue to be given the same amount of money. But the criteria for qualifying for these benefits will be changed for anyone who might request these payments in the future. Are you with me at the back? Great. James Heale.
Well, I think in terms of the MPs, I think they'll probably get the vote through tomorrow night. I do think there's an interesting piece of history here, which of course is that the first Labour rebellion under Tony Blair in 97, 49 MPs rebelled against that. That was low parent benefit. And as a result of that, the Secretary of State, I think Harriet Harman, eventually went, and her special advisor at the time was Liz Kendall. And of course, almost 30 years on, it's Liz Kendall pushing it through. Yes, and so...
How do you know that? You weren't even born.
Spent youth. I was 18 months at the time. But
the William Hague of his day.
Oh God, I have a better hairline than him, just about. But I think that the danger is, of course, is that I spoke to one MP today who said Europe is the Tories what welfare is to Labour. Labour really cares about the welfare state. Lots of Labour MPs, got one in the studio here tonight, come in and see their role as defending and enhancing the role of the welfare state. So I think that although they may win the battle in this case, overall, in terms of getting the programme through, they could lose the war, because I think that as a result of this vote that's gone through, has been conducted, how it appears to be the Treasury abacus economics pushing it through, I think they've lost a lot of goodwill, and I think it's something that will breed rebellion within a very fractious parliamentary party.
How rebellious are you feeling, Charlotte?
Well, I was one of the 108 MPs that signed the reasoned amendment, and that was broadly because we had in fact done everything the right way over a number of months behind, closed door meetings, raising our concerns with ministers, with our whips and so on. We were having a lot of meetings, but it wasn't engagement. And I think a lot of us had some really profound concerns about it. There have obviously been concessions that were made, which are very welcome. But I think a lot of us still have questions going into tomorrow about some of the specifics, because this isn't, for all of us, a kind of abstract question. There are people who have, children with special educational needs, for example, amongst our parliamentary party's ranks. This is something that is their lives.
So it sounds to me as though you're not quite sure what you're going to do tomorrow.
No, I've been having a number of conversations in recent days. As I said, I'm happy about the concessions that have been made, but I think I still have some questions. One of the things that I am troubled by, and again, I've been saying this to the party for months, is that there is a cut-off for new claimants of the age of 22 to receive the full amount. I have a number of children in my constituency who have special educational needs, who are at the moment, 15, 16 years old. They will be considered new claimants. They're not people who can be protected with the concessions that have already been made. But at the point at which they turn 18, they will not become less disabled for 4 years. until they reach 22.
So
and there
what
is
will convince you to vote for the second reading?
I think I want to have some answers around that particular question for the under 22s. I'm not saying that it's something that, necessarily needs to be for everyone under that age category, but I think we do have to say that for people that are on DLA at the moment who are children, that again, their incomes will be protected as they go into adulthood. And I think we do need to have much better engagement with disability charities. The things that have been said about co-production have been very helpful. But again, if you are asking disabled charities to help you draw up a programme of cuts, I don't think that is co-production in any meaningful way. And that's something that, again, I think we need clarity on before people can feel comfortable about letting this bill pass to the next stage.
Has it got to the point yet where the whip sidle up to you and say, well, Charlotte, of course, you vote against this tomorrow, that'll be your career ended, you'll never be a minister?
I don't think that I was necessarily going to be someone who was expecting a phone call anyway the next time there is a reshuffle. However, I will say genuinely, I think the whips have been brilliant throughout this process. They've been taking our concerns back. We've been raising them for months. The issue has been the lack of engagement from number 10 and number 11 on the things that MPs have been saying to our whips. Our whips have not behaved badly throughout this process. They have not threatened anyone. They've been having these honest conversations. There has been other bad behaviour, but it has not been coming from the whip's office.
So the bad behaviour is number 10, number 11?
It's some party officials who've got a little bit ahead of themselves. But as I said, the whips have
Morgan
not been a problem. Not Morgan, to my knowledge.
Go on, name some names.
I'm not naming names. Parliamentary privilege is not covered in the LBC studio.
Right, we're going to come to Rachel and Tina after the news headlines. It's 8:32. Here they are with Matt Hewitt.
A criminal investigation starting into whether comments at Glastonbury by the punk band Bob Vylan were a hate crime. The police are looking into chants about the Israeli military. The BBC says it should have stopped the live stream. 30 people have been killed in airstrikes by Israeli forces at a seaside cafe in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch says her party will vote against the government's welfare reforms tomorrow after hinting they may back them. Despite a series of concessions, the government's own modelling suggests the changes will push 150,000 people into poverty. One of Britain's largest oil refineries has collapsed into administration. Hundreds of jobs are at risk at the Lindsey Works in North Lincolnshire. LBC weather, a warm and sultry night ahead for southern regions, with temperatures staying in the low 20s, but drizzle in the north and lows of 11 degrees.
This is LBC. Listen on the move with the all-new LBC app. Download it for free from the App Store. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:35. Charlotte Nichols, Tina Stowell, Rachel Shabi and James Heale with me answering your questions. Now, we were taking a question which has now disappeared. Oh, no, here it is. Mike in Salisbury. Has the government done enough to convince you its welfare reforms should be passed tomorrow? We have yet to hear from Tina and Rachel. So Tina, let's come to you first. I imagine the answer from both of you is probably no.
No. I mean, and we'll be coming at it from different angles, I have no doubt. So for me, I think there's two issues here. One is the handling issue, and then the other is the substance. And I think it's been really interesting to hear Charlotte describe how this has been handled. I mean, the thing which strikes me with a government of such a sizable majority is that the bigger the majority, the more arrogance that will often breed. And an assumption that, we've got the numbers, we can get it through, just whack it through, as sometimes you might hear, people say from places like Number 10. And I think the reaction that they've had from their own parliamentary party, I think then begs another question in terms of what we might expect from this government over the next 3 or 4 years, because the big I was about to say their big change agenda, but this is part of their problem. They sort of been elected to change, but we've never really never been clear what the change is all about. But I don't expect, because of this, to see much by way of change that the kind of people who not necessarily voted for them, but the way in which they voted, led for them election, are going to feel very satisfied by. On the point of the welfare reforms, as I understand it, the changes that have attracted so much concern amongst Labour MPs are addressing the kind of health and PIP aspect, which only goes to the mental health and health conditions which are not physical. And this is the bit that I find really interesting, because it's not surprising to me that there is a lot of concern from people with the physical disabilities that they are going to be targeted through these reforms. And yet that bit of the bill, which is what is skyrocketing, the mental health claims, that is the bit which was not going to be subject to the reforms, and is now definitely not going to be subject to the reforms in the same extent that they originally planned. So I feel that this is just a bit of a mess all round, really. And
so why was it that on the Sunday morning political programmes yesterday, and I was on Trevor Phillips' one on Sky, I later watched Laura Kuenssberg, and I listened to Lewis Goodall, and Helen Waitley, the Conservative Work and Pension spokeswoman, she could not say how the Conservatives are going to vote on this. And I'm thinking, what an utter shambles of an opposition if you don't know how you're going to vote 2 days before the vote takes place.
Well, I mean, obviously I'm not in the Commons, so I'm not subject to the same sort of level of understanding and briefing as their intentions. But as I understood it, what the Conservatives have been arguing for, or saying that they would support the bill if there was going to be sort of more savings targeted at the place where the increase has gone up exponentially and where it is likely to go up even more, that they would want those savings to be used to prevent any tax rises in the autumn, and they wanted more in the bill to support getting people back to work. And if those were met, if those requests were met, then they would support it. I gather that they have now. I think I saw Kemi on the news earlier saying that the Tories won't support it tomorrow.
It's called opposition, isn't it? Rachel?
Well, I just fundamentally disagree with Labour and the leadership's approach on this. I don't think any party with the word Labour in its name should be introducing a bill that will strip billions in support for people who need it most, the most vulnerable in our society, and also, by the way, strips people of their dignity and their independence in the most disgraceful way. And I agree with James that they might win this battle of the vote, but they've lost so much goodwill and so much support, and just generating so much disappointment and despair. And I think this is a product of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor just boxing themselves in on economic policy. There's a very straightforward way of generating the income that they need 6 times more than they would get from these horrific cuts of vulnerable people and their benefits, and that's to tax people. That's a wealth tax, which has overwhelming popular support across different political leanings. If you tax people who earn over 10 million, just a little bit more than that will pay 6 times what the government will generate in revenue with the welfare cuts. And it's just so obvious a solution. And the fact that Labour is not interested or invested in redressing the rampant wealth inequality we have in this country and seems interested only in punishing the most vulnerable is horrifying, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
But Rachel, I mean, if they were to tax even more those introduce even more sort of wealth taxes as you described them, we're already now seeing an exodus of some of the wealthiest people in this country, and they're taking their money with them, and that means that they're not paying anything into us. So we are losing.
I mean, that's just a fallacy. People don't leave over that. And also, we're talking about 2% for people who earn over 10 million. But everyone can see the justice in that. And frankly, if it means 1 or 2 billionaires leave,
but it's more than that.
I would rather people were treated respectfully and we would support the more vulnerable than we would allow rich people to hive away their wealth in tax avoidance and offshore assets.
As much as I think wealthy people should pay their fair share of tax,
we're talking about the super wealthy
here. Really, really do.
Over 10 million.
At the same time, we need wealthy people, particularly those who are entrepreneurs and are business figures, to be creating the jobs and the economic opportunities that then get ploughed back into the economy.
Tina, I do not know how you can say that with a straight face in a country where trickle-down economics has demonstrably failed, where we've got the more rampant inequalities now than we've ever had. It's a proven fact. Even the IMF have said this, that wealth does not trickle down. It is not the case that people who earn over 10 million will trickle down their wealth.
Well, let's just...
they're not even earning it.
Do you mean earn over 10 million or have 10 million in assets?
Have a very good point, because this isn't
it's very different, isn't it?
This is unearned wealth that we're talking about that should be taxed and which people are
No, but
avoiding.
are you talking about taxing assets? So if you have a big house that's worth over 10 million, you would get this rather than earned income?
I think that there's a big opportunity here to tax people over assets rather than income. And if we actually equalise the tax on assets with the tax on income, we would be in a much better place. So I'm really glad you asked that question.
Pauline says, every chance Iain Dale gets, he criticises the Tories and Kemi. Shame on him. Well, I wasn't aware I had criticised Kemi, but I was criticising the opposition. If they can't decide how to vote shortly before a vote, I think that's pretty shameful.
For the Kemi defence, if you will, perhaps there's something
someone has
to. Why not? Would never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. And perhaps, when Labour's turning on itself, maybe let's simply let them duke it out. I mean, there's not going to be an election anytime soon. They've got a majority of something like 150 or thereabouts.
Right. Jamie in York says, does Keir Starmer's apology in an interview over the weekend for the Island of Strangers comment count as another U-turn, given he'd previously doubled down about it? Was he right to apologise for the comment? Now, in an interview with his biographer, Tom Baldwin, the Prime Minister has said he wouldn't have used those words if I'd known they were or even would be interpreted as an echo of Enoch Powell, adding that the words he used were not right and he deeply regrets using them. Well, I suppose he would, given that he hadn't actually read the speech before he delivered it. I mean, Charlotte, that is embarrassing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider it to be a U-turn, but I do think that he was right to distance himself from those comments. I think they caused enormous hurt, not only within the Parliamentary Labour Party, where we obviously have a number of ethnic minority MPs, but again in the communities that we represent. I think in the broader speech, he had made some very strong points about actually community cohesion, how you bring people together, that's the path that we should be on. But I think the phraseology that he used about an island of strangers ended up being the bit that was focused on and took away from what was overall a very positive message about how this Labour government is really wanting to stitch communities together.
Right, Rachel, if you can all be reasonably brief on this one, that would be good.
I think that if Labour wanted to stitch people together, it would use very different language, and it would also have very different policy. And I think both are absolutely horrific. And I found that comment about the island of strangers one of the most disgusting comments I've heard. And, I would rather him not say, oh, I wouldn't have used those words. I would rather him use better words about immigration, about racialized minorities, about the diversity that is a strength of this country, and actually back that up with better policy as well.
Tina, you've worked in a leader's office under William Hague. Can you ever imagine William Hague going to deliver a speech that he hadn't read a word of?
No, not least because he was always very involved in the drafting and writing of his speeches. I mean, clearly you have other people who will, sometimes come up with different phrases for you in language, but William was very much involved in his own speeches and most definitely would have not delivered one without having reading it properly before. I mean, you are a sort of better historian of sort of different politicians than I am. I mean, I didn't interpret what Keir Starmer said in any way as a sort of echo of Enoch Powell. I thought that speech, from my perspective, I thought that was one of Keir Starmer's best speeches, actually, and I thought that in terms of trying to demonstrate he understood the concerns of the majority of the population in terms of the impact. He was
chasing Nigel Farage. That was what it was all about.
Let me just finish the point. I think in terms of that may be true, but I think in terms of addressing those people who, and as I say, this is the majority, are concerned about the impact on society of the accelerated rate of immigration that we've seen over recent years, and also the illegal immigration. I thought that he actually sort of connected his words, the way in which those words would have resonated. So for him then subsequently to backtrack and deny, I mean, I just think this is, for me, it goes back to this is. You are not anybody who is hoping that this government is going to deliver on change and we are going to see as a result of this government the kind of differences that people are crying out for, whether it's in improvements to public services or from their politicians, an understanding and a response to genuine, perfectly legitimate concerns about immigration. He's going to let you down.
James.
Absolutely crazy. I don't know what he was thinking. And, frankly, two things. One of which is he did 3 interviews in The Observer, New Statesman and Sunday Times. 8,500 words. He was moody. He was listless. I couldn't discern any message he was trying to land. And the second thing, of course, was in that speech he gave in May, Island of Strangers speech, he talked about how this isn't from a script, this is something from the heart. And yet he's completely disowned it. So why on earth should we put any weight in the next words the Prime Minister gives from the bully pulpit of Number 10 again?
Answers on a postcard, please. 8:48.
LBC.
matters.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
That, did you?
Right, we have Rachel Shabi, Charlotte Nichols, Tina Stowell and James Heale with us answering your questions. I can guarantee you will have never been asked this question before. Martin's in Doncaster. Fire away, Martin.
Hi, Iain and panel. Yeah, the question is Moulton Town Council in Yorkshire are planning to charge 40p to have a wee in their toilets. Should it be free to have a pee?
Eloquently put, if I may say so, and tastefully put. Now, the Moulton Town Council is planning to introduce charges for public toilets in the town centre when it takes over managing them from North Yorkshire Council. Is this a subject which we should feel outraged about? Tina?
My instinctive answer to this is it would be better not to charge. So I think it should be free for people to have a wee. However, what I would be more concerned about, whether there was if there was a charge or not, is that the public toilets are really clean and well maintained. And if the council is saying that they're having to introduce a nominal fee in order to maintain them to a standard that everybody would feel is a good standard, then I would probably be willing to pay it. But if I don't know what your toilets are like, but if you don't like them and you're also going to be charged for them and they're not going to get any better, I would definitely object.
I didn't think public toilets existed any longer in towns like Moulton. Charlotte?
They should absolutely be free. Sonia Kumar, the MP for Dudley, actually did a really good debate the other day in Parliament on incontinence and how many people struggle with it in the UK.
I heard her on the Matt Ford podcast talking about that.
It's one of those issues that a lot of people have medical conditions that mean that, when nature calls, they very urgently need to answer. And a lot of us don't carry change around on us anymore to be able to pay for toilets. And I think it puts people in a really invidious position. For basic access rights, people should be able to access a toilet and they shouldn't have to pay to use it.
That's true, actually, isn't it? In that, I don't carry cash anymore
It's a good point.
Am I going to be able to pay by Apple Pay?
I once got caught in Euston Station when they still charged there, and I'd been hit with a wave of norovirus. And I tell you what, it was the worst day of my life, having to ask strangers desperately for some change to be able to use them, because I was like, it's about to get very real very quickly. Again, not a position that we want people in Yorkshire to be facing.
I could tell you the most disgusting story now, but I'm not going to. James?
That's a nice switch to me, thank you. First of all, I think the UK has some of the lowest numbers of public toilets in the whole of Europe, which is something that's been exacerbated by recent trends for historical reasons as well. I think what's interesting is talking to Tory MPs recently is how some of them are much more concerned now about the politics of the social sphere and sort of seeing the degradation of everything from your local high street to local services, the fact that the council can't even provide things like public parks anymore, and of course public toilets. So I do think there's perhaps a bit of a rethink going on, which is that people think, why should the public pay for this, etc., or why should the council pay for this? But it's the second-order consequences. If we see people, for instance, going outside in public, etc., what does that do to the overall politics of the local area? So I do think probably it's something that's worth considering, and it's something I imagine that could have... I think it was a thing Labour campaigned on in the last election, actually. It has some electoral potency as well.
Right. A text question from Sandra in Plumstead. What should be done with a 92-year-old murderer? Now, 92-year-old Ryland Headley has today been convicted of the rape and murder of Louisa Dunn in 1967, ending what is believed to have been the UK's longest-running cold case. He will be sentenced tomorrow morning. Rachel, let's come to you on this. I mean, in theory, why should a 92-year-old be treated any differently from anybody else, I suppose?
I agree. I think that someone of adult age should be sentenced, regardless of age, the same as anyone else. I don't think age is a factor in the manner of the sentencing at all, once people are in adulthood.
Tina?
I agree. I think he's committed a crime, and thank God that he's been convicted of it before he dies, and he should be punished in a way that the judge would consider if he was a younger man.
Corey informs me that I didn't let you answer the weeing question, Rachel. And that he says, I can tell you've been away.
It's a shame, because, I think a lot about toilets.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I think there's just too few of them in the UK, and they absolutely should be free. And, fortunately, I'm not someone who, needs them to be available and free in the way that Charlotte was so eloquently describing. Yet, of course, it's going to come for all of us. But, there are people with all kinds of medical and health conditions that absolutely need them to be free, and I'm really glad Charlotte spoke about that so well. But I do think, when you're out and about, one of the things I think about is where's the nearest toilet, right? Trains, train stations, if you travel a lot, it's just a constant thing. And yes, they should be free.
Anyway, slightly awkwardly, back to the 92-year-old murderer. Charlotte?
I think the very fact that he's been convicted, I don't know a lot about the details about this case, but I'm assuming that means that he's been found fit to stand trial by definition, and therefore, having passed the verdict, the sentence should be passed in the same way. As far as I'm concerned, his age is immaterial.
James?
I think this has echoes of in the 1990s when we passed an act in this country to go after people who'd committed historic crimes during the war, and there were sort of lots of aged Nazis in the sort of 90s at the time. I'm a big believer, that it should be the application of law. Social trust only works if we can see the law being applied equally. So I do think these people should, even if it's only for a certain amount of time, spend some time in jail. It's a proof that you can never escape the long arm of the law while you're alive.
And also, 92 is, you could say it's the new 72, isn't it? Because, when I was growing up, 92, you really thought that really was... very few people ever got to 92. Whereas nowadays, that's not the case.
Another decade, something like that. Why not?
I might have another 30 years, you never know.
We hope so. We'll be cross questions in the 2050s.
But can you imagine?
All too easily.
I don't think so. I think if this was a case just regarding rape rather than murder and rape, would that have any impact on your views on this? Because, a 92-year-old is not going to necessarily be able to... wouldn't be seen as a danger in the way that somebody younger would.
I go back to Charlotte's point. If he's been convicted, we can all understand sort of, circumstances, etc., or whatever the jury has found ground to convict. I'm satisfied that they should be locked up, even if it was for...
You were looking at me in a horrified way there, Rachel. I was playing devil's advocate.
Okay, that's a relief to hear.
It's part of my job. Right, our fun question. Jeff in Birmingham. In all the talk about some rapper I've never heard of, there's not been enough focus on Black Sabbath being given the freedom of this fine city. So who deserves to be given the freedom of your hometown or city? Now, Black Sabbath have reformed for the first time in 20 years to play a farewell concert at Villa Park Stadium next week. I could insert a joke there, but I won't. Your home city, town...
Well, my home city is Nottingham. My town is Beeston. I think if I was going for Beeston, I would go for Paul Smith, the designer, because he's from Beeston. And in the local Wetherspoons, they have a picture of Paul Smith up on the wall. So a local sort of
I have
local
many of
boy,
his clothes. People will be surprised to hear.
And I think if it was for the city of Nottingham and a singer, the only group that's coming to my mind is Paper Lace.
Okay.
I can't even remember the name of it. I'm trying to remember the name
James,
of the
they were a
record.
popular music beat combo in the 1970s.
I've read about them.
Have you?
Yeah,
right.
don't worry.
What's your answer?
I'd probably go for... So I'm from Richmond in southwest London. I think, given it's Wimbledon, I'd go for Tim Henman. He gave me a lot of joy growing up, a lot of heartbreak too, and so I think he never won Wimbledon, so why not give him the gong of freedom in the City of London?
Rachel?
I'm really hopeless at these on-the-spot questions, but I have to say I respect the effort of getting Black Sabbath into a question.
I can't actually think
radio.
of a Black Sabbath song, can you?
No.
I know.
War Pigs.
War Pigs. There you go.
Yeah, that's the name of it.
Goodness
That's
me.
the song.
So, have you not got an answer?
I haven't got an answer, I'm sorry. Fail.
Let
Big
us
F.
all down. Paranoid, says Corey. Yes, I know you are. Why have you put that? Oh, it's a song. Charlotte.
Well, in terms of sort of famous Warringtonians, a lot of people don't know that Tim Curry is from Warrington, so perhaps he could have freedom of the town. And
It's Tim Curry.
Tim Curry?
Yeah.
Are you joking?
Who is he?
Like from Rocky Horror Picture Show?
The actor.
No idea.
I didn't know who he was either.
But also, if it's got to be a musician in the vein of Black Sabbath, Kerry Katona's a famous Warringtonian, so maybe she can have
Atomic Kitten.
freedom of the town. Atomic Kitten.
Did not know
Or
that.
freedom from bankruptcy. Just a thought. Very uncharitable one. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. On tomorrow's panel, we have Natalie Fleet from Labour. She's a new Labour MP. Greg Smith from the Conservatives. Former Reform UK Deputy Leader Ben Habib, who I gather has started a new political party. It's all the fashion
I thought
nowadays.
you were going to say a band.
the Habibis, and the author and commentator Yasmin Alabai-Brown. So they're on our panel tomorrow night. Now, I was reading the Sunday Times yesterday, as is my wont. There was a very interesting article by Jason Cowley, who I was rather shocked to see that 1 in 4 of the working age population of this country are disabled. I thought that cannot be right. So I started doing a bit of research on it. And it is right. House of Commons Library statistics, very sort of well informed. And then I thought, well, what's the situation in other countries? So I started using ChatGPT and finding out in Germany, France, Italy, Spain and Switzerland, it's between 4 and 8%. Now, is this because we classify disabled people differently in this country? So what does this word disabled actually mean to you?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the police are investigating whether comments at Glastonbury by the punk band Bob Vylan were a hate crime. Their vocalist appeared to start a chant against the Israeli military. The BBC says it regrets not stopping Saturday's live stream. Professor Jonathan Shallett, chairman of talent management company Intertalent, says the corporation has handled this terribly.
And they got it wrong with no reason to get it wrong. All the BBC had to do was have a 15-second delay button. They could have silenced that band or gone to another stage. It was the easiest problem for the BBC to solve. I'm amazed that someone editorial at the BBC was not aware that at Glastonbury, the odds were someone was going to overstep the mark.